Before 1946, the Marshall Islands were a pristine paradise of 29 atolls with vibrant coral reefs and rich cultural traditions. Indigenous Marshallese lived sustainably, relying on fishing and coconut farming. The population of around 10,000 maintained complex navigation skills passed down through generations. This fragile ecosystem had remained untouched for millennia, with biodiversity rivaling the Great Barrier Reef. The atoll's limestone foundations rose just meters above sea level, making them particularly vulnerable to disruption. In 1947, the U.S. military arrived under a UN trusteeship agreement, ostensibly to administer the islands. Warships carrying thousands of personnel and equipment anchored in the lagoons. Strategic Air Command identified the remote location as ideal for nuclear testing, 4,000 miles from San Francisco, yet controllable as U.S. territory. Without meaningful consultation, the military began constructing observation bunkers and instrumentation towers. Islanders watched uneasily as their ancestral lands were transformed into a military complex overnight. July 1, 1946 marked the first nuclear detonation, Test Baker at Bikini Atoll. The 23-kiloton blast vaporized ships in the lagoon and created radioactive rain that contaminated the entire atoll. The explosion was 1,000 times more powerful than Hiroshima. Within hours, radiation levels reached 20 roentgens per hour, a lethal dose being 500 roentgens. The military declared the area safe despite Geiger counters maxing out. This began 12 years of testing that would ultimately release the equivalent of 7,200 Hiroshima bombs. In March 1946, 167 Bikini Islanders were forcibly relocated to Rongerik Atoll, a barren island 1/6 the size of their home. They were promised the move would be temporary, like children taken from school for summer vacation. Rongerik lacked adequate food and fresh water. Starvation forced them to eat toxic fish and coconuts. Within months, many developed malnutrition and radiation sickness. The U.S. provided minimal aid, considering them primitive people who could live off the land. This began decades of displacement for thousands of Marshallese. On March 1, 1954, the U.S. detonated Castle Bravo, a 15-megaton thermonuclear bomb 1,000 times more powerful than Hiroshima. The unexpected fireball stretched 4.5 miles wide, vaporizing 3 islands completely. Radioactive fallout contaminated over 7,000 square miles, exposing 239 Marshallese on nearby atolls to acute radiation sickness. The Bikini Snow. Radioactive ash fell on villages, causing burns and later cancers. This remains the largest U.S. nuclear test ever conducted. Within hours of Castle Bravo, Rongelap Islanders experienced vomiting, diarrhea, and skin burns from beta radiation. Their hair fell out in clumps. U.S. doctors documented but didn't treat them for 48 hours, later admitting this was to study radiation effects. Children played in the snow, not knowing it was deadly strontium-90. Thyroid cancers and birth defects would emerge years later. The 1956 4.1 Project secretly studied exposed Marshallese as human subjects without informed consent, comparing them to irradiated lab animals. Declassified documents reveal Project 4.1, a secret medical study of radiation effects on Marshallese. For decades, U.S. researchers tracked exposed populations without proper treatment or disclosure. Blood samples and autopsy tissues were taken for research. Women were given experimental treatments without consent. Birth defects spiked. Jellyfish babies born without bones. Miscarriages doubled. The U.S. Atomic Energy Commission called the islands by far the most contaminated place in the world, yet continued testing until 1958. By 1958, 67 nuclear tests had vaporized entire islands and left craters up to 1.5 miles wide. Alujalab Island disappeared completely in the 1952 Ivy Mike test. The explosions fractured coral reefs, causing chronic erosion. Today, radioactive waste buried in Runit Dome leaks into the ocean. Climate change accelerates the damage. Rising seas flood contaminated soil. The Marshall Islands government estimates 40% of cancer deaths are radiation-related. Many atolls remain uninhabitable with radiation levels 100 times normal. Over 4,000 Marshallese remain displaced today, many living in poverty on EB Island, dubbed the slum of the Pacific. The U.S. paid $150 million in compensation, 1986. But healthcare and cleanup costs exceed $2 billion. Traditional land inheritance systems collapsed without territories to pass down. Cultural knowledge of navigation and fishing fades as elders die. We are a people without an island, laments a Bikini elder. Those who returned found coconuts still too radioactive to eat. 2010 tests showed 15 millirems per hour, 50 times safe levels. Today, Marshallese activists demand justice while facing new threats. Climate change could submerge the islands by 2035. The U.S. denies responsibility for radiation-related healthcare. Nuclear waste leaks from Runit Dome as sea levels rise. We are not laboratory rats, states a survivor. Young Marshallese document elders' stories before they're lost. The UN has declared the U.S. in violation of human rights obligations. As the world remembers Hiroshima, the Marshall Islands' nuclear holocaust remains largely forgotten, a silenced chapter of Cold War history.